Il cornetto all'italiana.
The Italian croissant. In this dough we can realize two versions of it. We can make it brioche-like, so without puffing it, or we can make it puffed, which is what we're going to do today. As you can see, the ingredients are more or less the same, so we have our flours, fats, eggs, sugars, and the yeasts. This is an indirect method, means that we're going to use a culture of microorganisms and yeasts that's already been worked previously. Then we have our 𝐒𝐫𝐢𝐸. We cleaned it from the external crusts after 15 to 18 hours of ripening in the fridge. We removed the core out of the crusts. We weighed it out and we added flour and water. We sponged it nicely, and we also sponged it to improve the insertion of the 𝐒𝐵𝐲 in the dough. Before using it, remember to break it to pieces. So let's take our flours. We're going to use a strong flour, a Manitoba flour. We're going to insert our 𝐒𝐵𝐲 cut into pieces. We'll understand that the 𝐒𝐵𝐲 or the sourdough is ready when they start free-floating on the surface of the water. We're going to insert our hook. As it's stirring, we're inserting the sugars. Remember that if in your ingredients you have liquid sugars, honey, malt, put them right after the liquids to improve their insertion. Let's take our liquids. In this case, we only have eggs. I'm going to insert them inside. Remember that the main difference between an Italian cornetto and a croissant is in the quantity of butter that we're using in the base and in the puffing phase, and it's also in the fact that usually French croissants use water, whereas the Italian croissant have eggs. We'll have a consistency in the French one that's more friable, more preservability, but in the mouth it will be much fatter and buttery. Let's prepare our butter, always aromatizing it with the microplane. We're going to use lemon and orange. Remember that the aromatic choice is always very personal. And the salt. So we aromatized our butter, salt and aromas. Let's wait for the dough to start closing. I'm going to increase the speed progressively. In the meantime, we're going to take our container or bowl to then place our dough in. Let's take some lard or another fat of choice. Let's grease our bowl up to improve the unmolding. To remove the dough more easily after it has leavened. As we notice that the dough starts to stick, to join together, we're going to start preparing our butter, and we'll add it in one step. Let's progressively increase the speed. We have a dough that's a little bit more rigid. This is important because the type of product we want to make will have a structure that holds, quite nice structure, especially because we have to layer the dough like puff pastry, so we need a base that's not too elastic. This has quickly cleaned the sides of our bowl. We can stop here. The dough clearly is not ready yet, but remember that compared to the other doughs we've seen today, it is a product that we have to keep working with. It has a very rough shape. We're going to finish it manually, almost massaging it more than kneading it. It's important because if we stimulate the gluten net too much, we risk that during the folds we might stress too much. Always trying to alternate movements to resting periods, even if the periods are short. Or if you want to make maybe a finer work, you can also make a few folds without the butter at the base of the croissant to improve the structure of the gluten that's forming. As I go on, you can notice that the paste has smoothened. I prefer to alternate this and not stress the gluten continuously. Just like this, very slowly, so that it's smoothening out. And I'm going to take some grease. I'm going to protect the base of our croissant from the air contact. And then we're going to take it later. So now we've used a pre-dough, so it's quite clear that we're going to let it rise in the fridge. Usually when we use a pre-dough, it's because we want to have a better rising phase, so we'll go in the fridge. And if we have to work in the day, always 18-20 degrees in leavening chamber. Here our container, we're going to close it. And always giving it some holds. This is it for the first phase of Italian cornetto or croissant. We will take it out of the fridge when it's ready. We will fold it without the butter once to improve the structure, and then we will do 3 folds. We can even do 3 simple folds in which we will put the plastic butter. So we have our base. Remember that when you put it in the blast chiller to just lose some temperature before you roll it out. So you make your dough, you just let it leaven. After the leavening, if you're doing it in the fridge, you just have to remove it and push it a little bit, and then you can roll it out. If it comes from 18-20 degrees, just blast chill it before, because when you roll it out, we won't have a too elastic dough. Now we're going to put some flour. Just move it a little bit before, because the mixture will be very damp. And we're going to roll it out. Always alternating, trying to give it a shape that's quite regular. Change direction, move the flour on top and bottom to avoid clumps that might cut through the dough when we insert the butter. Try to always roll it on one side. So give it the shape to insert the butter. We're going to take our plastic butter. We're going to let it adhere at the center of our base, just like we saw in puff pastry. And here we're folding. Now we're going to put it in the fridge or blast chiller for around 2 hours in the fridge, or 40 minutes in the blast chiller, and we're doing this to manage the overheating of the butter. Now we will take it out and we'll make a 3-fold, resting, another 3-fold and rest for 3 times, because we need a specific opening of our cornetto, so we don't need to fold it too much. Always remember to grease it with some fat and put some plastic to avoid the formation of crusts. If too many crusts form, when you roll it out, it might break apart. So after having done the fold, always with the closure on the bottom, a little bit of flour, and we will lay it out. To especially control if the temperature of the butter is optimal for its right extension phase. Every now and then just move to avoid formation of clumps that might break the flour apart, especially in the first stage, like for puff pastry. Keep the right quantity of flour under control. So always moving, replacing it. Always also keep under control the fact that your rolling pin must be clean, so that it doesn't ruin the dough. We'll do 3 simple folds. The alternance must always be done, but since the product is nice and cold, we can also do 2 folds consecutively. This way of alternating between the rolling out and distribution of the flour allows us to also let the dough rest a little bit, so not forcing it too much. Make sure that the air goes towards the external part of the border. Sorry, it doesn't go towards the border. You can see that by doing the second fold straight away, the gluten has more resistance, so it's more difficult. Clearly, when we will be in our lab, we will use a dough sheeter that will allow us to be a little bit performing and quick. Always remember to use some oven paper or plastic film that must be slightly greased to avoid any crusts. Now we necessarily have to blast chill to let the gluten net rest and restabilize the temperature of the butter. I'm going to close in this way, and at the sides, almost like a gift, a present. And this is it for the second fold of our Italian croissant. This is the finishing part about the formation of our croissant. So after having done three folds, so simple folds, we're going to lay our dough at 1 centimeter thickness, and we're going to cut. When you work in the lab, you'll use some croissant cutters that will allow us to have a very precise cut. So a triangle that's long and narrow, and the size of the croissant depends on the type of croissant you want to realize. We don't need to cut it as we did in the past, so we just have to enlarge it a little bit, and then we're going to close it like this, rolling it. So every time we close, we pull towards us. We're going to pull the tip and let it fall underneath. And we're going to place it on a tray. Once again, so pulling it at the sides. You don't need to do anything else, you don't need to cut it in the middle. Closing, and every time you roll it, push it towards yourself, not to let too much air in. Once we get to the tip, just pull the tip a little bit and let it adhere at the base. If you want it curved, you just have to turn the tips like this. One last time. Pulling, rolling and pushing, just like this, pushing towards myself to make sure we're not forming too much air, pulling the tip and closing. From here, second leavening, 18-20 degrees, between 2 hours and 3 hours of time to have a more pleasant growth. If you need 26-27 degrees in leavening chamber, 70% of humidity, and we will go with the baking, 180 degrees for 20-25 minutes. And this is it with the preparation of the Italian croissant.